All right. Good evening, everybody. I want to welcome each one of you for joining us this evening on a very somber and challenging subject, one that impacts each of us individually and collectively as a community. Each one of us chose to come this evening to talk about the war in Ukraine and how we can help our children because of a personal reason. Whatever your reason is for being here, I want you to know that we're welcome and we're happy that you're here. Our hope is in the next 90 minutes that we'll be able to provide support for you, that we'll be able to provide information, possibly challenge you to think differently about things, that we'll be able to give you tools and strategies for helping your children and yourselves manage this really complicated time. My name is Janice Goldwater. I am the founder and CEO of Adoptions Together. I'm also the mother of 4 children, one of whom came to me having been born in Russia. So this issue impacts me and my family very personally too. I want to introduce you to my colleagues, Carrie Tompkins and Erica Maltz, who together, the 3 of us, will be leading this conversation. So, Carrie? You're mute.
There we go. I'm Carrie Tompkins, and clearly my picture was taken before COVID. I am really honored and happy to be here. I am an adoptive mother of 2 children, of 2 children from Ukraine. And they are 20 and 22. So they're young adults and are being really impacted by what's happening. So it's personal to me. I'm also an adoptee, and it's really striking to me how the issues that are unique to the adoption experience surface again and again in all these different ways. And so it's a real gift for me to be able to have this conversation, do this town hall with my friends and colleagues, Janice and Erica, who I've known for a long time, and and to bring my personal experience into my professional life. And that's not something I honestly get to do as much as you think I would. So anyway, welcome everybody. We're really happy that you're here to join us tonight.
Yes, and I am Erica Maltz. I'm the clinical trainer for the agency. And my association with Odessa, with Ukraine, was such a great opportunity. A few years ago, under the auspices of Adoptions Together, I traveled to the Ukraine and I did some training with a group of psychologists who were working with orphanage caretakers and school teachers in the orphanage. And I was there for 6 days and got to know this Ukrainian group of fantastic women. They were empowered, they were smart, warm, and gracious. So I have a real soft spot in my heart for all of Ukraine, but particularly those folks in Odessa. So thank you. I'm very glad to be here tonight.
Wonderful. Thank you, Carrie, and thank you, Erica. We are hosting this town hall for all of you, and we just wanted to go over a few of the rules. We called it the rules of the road. One is, as you know, when you came on, that this is being taped, and it is going to live on our website. Therefore, to protect confidentiality, we'll be having questions and reflections in our chat. We will not be saving the chat on our website. And so when you have questions, we have a colleague, Jessica Ostrander, who will be sharing your questions with us. So we want you to feel comfortable to ask and to bring up whatever's on your mind, because this is hard stuff. We also have the Washington Post is doing a story on parenting and the issues that their focus is going to be on children adopted from Russia, on how this is impacting them. And they'll be doing that, I believe, this week. So the reporter who's doing the story may be joining us in the audience. And then additionally, NBC is doing a piece this evening, and they are interested in our town hall. They're interested in what's going on with children and families. They went over and interviewed a family who have a son adopted from Ukraine. So I just wanted to let you know that that's sort of the frame of what we're working with. And also we will avoid any kind of policy conversations and keep the focus on our children and how we can best support them. We ask that you keep yourselves on mute and that questions come through the chat box. And what we plan to do, we've put together a program that we thought would be helpful. And really appreciate those of you who took the time to ask questions. We read over every one of your questions and hope that we're able to address them. And we also have left time at the end for questions and answers. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Carrie.
Great. So, Erica, Janice, and I got together to do this thing called the town hall. And in trying to figure out how best to structure it, we decided that really what we wanted to do, rather than sort of a traditional kind of, webinar where we each take a section and we sort of, deliver information to you, that we're really going to look at this as a way for us to have a conversation, bringing in all of your questions and responding to them. We know as the days went on, we kept receiving more and more questions, and we really want you to know that we heard you. And our approach was really to take all of those issues that we were hearing and really contextualize them for this opportunity. So we're going to be talking about some of the feelings, the difficult feelings as parents caring for children who have been adopted from Ukraine and from Russia, how we support them, how difficult that can be in light of this age that we're living in, where there's so much access to so much information and content and images. So we're going to be covering a broad range of issues that we think are really pertinent to why you're here tonight. We also are recognizing that this is not a one and done. There were so many things that came in from people that we thought, wow, that by itself could be a whole nother evening. So we're going to really look at the possibility of doing something more than what we're doing tonight. And we're going to ask for your feedback about those ideas at the end. But so what I want to say is that there's a lot of intention that went into how we approach this tonight. And part of what we felt was really important was to be really honest about how difficult our emotions are and how to respond effectively to the experiences that our children are having. And our hope is that you're going to come away from this evening with new understanding about what our children are feeling, how they're coping with it, and how we can be an emotional container for them. And, recognizing that we're in a time where we cannot fully protect them from the pain of what they see and feel. And so, part of our intentionality is you're going to notice that there's going to be some provocative content. There are no tragic images in here. There's no upsetting images. But one of the things that I hear a lot in my different hats within the adoption community as a professional is that the voice of children and adolescents and young adults are not heard. And so that's what we really wanted to include tonight. So you're going to hear that. And I want to do a shout out to my two amazing children. I don't do this. I never do this, but I must do it. They both shared with me their feelings and some of their thoughts about how they cope with what's happening. And also my daughter's artwork is in here throughout as a way of sharing her contribution and her expression of her experience. So, and finally, Erica mentioned this wonderful opportunity that she had to go to Odessa to work with a psychology team there at the different orphanages, including one that came from Russia. I also had that beautiful experience at a different time. And so we know some of the same people. And one of those people you're going to hear from her. She had a very specific message she wanted to deliver tonight. So that's also part of what we're including. And then you already know that we're going to do a question and answer at the end for anything that we haven't quite covered. And then it's to be continued. So that's what we'll do. And at the very end, we'll send resources out based on what we've covered tonight and more. So.
Just one more thing I wanted to mention again is please, if you have a question or a comment, feel free to put that in the chat, and we will, Jessica from time to time may be pointing out to us that there are some questions and comments for us to address. Thank you, Carrie.
think we're ready for our next.
Okay, we're ready for a poll. We wanted to find out about you guys. We wanted to find out really who is in the audience. So we developed this poll. Here it is. Great. So if you can complete it and put down your answer, we'll have a summary of it afterwards. So we find out really who's here. Okay. Are we ready for the results? Okay, so 12% of you have adopted a child from the Ukraine. More of you, however, have adopted a child from Russia. And we're so glad that a few of you who are here were actually adopted from Ukraine and from Russia. And 35% of you are here for other reasons, and we can really appreciate your curiosity and wanting to learn. So thank you. And then there's another part to the poll. About the ages of your children. Okay, so 12 or under. Some of you may have younger ones, 13 to 17, 18 to 25, and over 26 years old. Good, everybody's doing this very quickly. Okay, so none of you have children under 12, 33%. Third of you have children between 6% under 12. 35% have children between 13 and 17, 18 to 25 is about 41%, and over 26 years old is 24%. So most of you have older children, teenagers, and a larger amount of young adults. Okay, thank you.
Okay, come back to the PowerPoint.
Yes.
You know, it's interesting in terms of looking at the stats and, you know, seeing, one more slide, please. And seeing, you know, my child is 30. I mean, she was 10 when we adopted her 20 years ago. And she's still my baby, you know, she's still my heart. And so, and as we look at the ages, you know, we think about child development and how trauma impacts development, and the chronological age, the developmental age. So it's really important. You know, as we think about, for many of our children going through the day-to-day, they're not, the most important thing they're thinking about is not that they were adopted. There's times that adoption is more prevalent, and there's chapters that it's more prevalent through development. And you know, anybody who hasn't studied how children process and understand adoption, we've got some great training available that you can find on our website. But there's lots of resources out there, and I highly recommend that you educate yourself. When we have something like this war, it's out front and center. It's very hard to have been adopted from Russia or from Ukraine, and right now not be thinking about it. We're watching families get torn apart. We're watching children be hurt. We're seeing family separation, and it's very normal for all of us to be really moved and touched by that, and particularly for our kids who actually were separated from their first families. So, wondering, is my birth family okay? Wondering about, even though it's been 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 5 years since a child actually left the orphanage, are those kids okay? Thinking back to the kids that they once knew, what happened to them? Are they okay? Thinking about the staff they knew. And for some people, there's that survivor's guilt, like, oh my God, I got out. But what if my birth family didn't? I got out. What if the other kids didn't? So that can be a feeling that comes up for some of our kids, and really wondering now about my home country. Where did I come from? For people who are adopted from Russia, looking at what is the government doing in their war against Ukraine, as compared to what are the people of Russia doing. And there's got to be a real separation, because it's very easy to blame. We live in a society that we blame and shame when things happen. And the whole idea of othering, of saying all of you this or all of you that, is really dangerous. And so it's so important to think about the use of language, and really recognizing the difference between what the government under the leadership of Putin is doing versus how the Russian people as a society are dealing with the whole situation. It doesn't matter if you're 15 or 40 years old, these kinds of issues will kick up. And even, for many of us whose families came from this part of the world, it's really painful, and it's a replication of old trauma. Another issue that comes up right now for some is the whole issue of identity. Who am I? Am I an American? Am I a Ukrainian? Am I Ukrainian American? Am I an American and a Ukrainian or Russian? So this is a time that we're really thinking quite a bit of who am I and where did I come from? Another piece, particularly for adolescents, is the fear of being bullied, of possibly being bullied. I was talking with a neighbor the other day who has middle schoolers, and she said, her daughter came home and she said in the cafeteria they were debating the war, and she said, I think I can control how much content she has and what's being told to her, but I can't. She gets out into the school and we have no control over it, and kids say all kinds of things to each other. So we have to be really aware of our children and how they're being treated, and we're going to talk more about how you can do that. Another piece is the spectrum of grief, and there's no traditional rituals that we have around grief in a situation when we were adopted from another country, from another culture, and then that country was attacked and it was in danger. And so we don't have a ritual for that. So we've got to create something to acknowledge it. We've got to realize that rituals play a really important part. So maybe, saying a prayer together as a family, helping your child, Carrie's going to share some poetry, but, really doing something so it can both be acknowledged and expressed. Finally, I just wanted to talk about the concept of ambiguous loss. Ambiguous loss is something we talk a lot about in our community, because there's so much loss that we can't exactly put our finger on. We can't see the loss. Sometimes when adults have a pregnancy loss, they grieve for quite a bit, the loss of an idea of a child that never existed. For a child that was not raised in their birth family that they were born into, they may wonder, who are they? And how do I grieve for somebody I never knew? For a child who was separated from their birth family, who they can recall, not knowing whatever happened to them, are they alive? Are they dead? Are they suffering? Are they safe? Do they think of me? There's no clearly defined way to make sense of it. So it becomes more difficult for people when they have an ambiguous loss. And the more we can get some language around ambiguous loss, the more manageable it becomes. So Carrie, can I turn it over to you if you want to say anything else about this? Or
Yeah, so I just kind of want to linger here for just a minute more about this idea of identity and how for our kids, how it becomes more complex. And so we know that for adoptees, the whole developmental task of identity formation is more complicated anyway, because you're trying to integrate, where you come from with where you are now. You have origins that are different than your adoptive family, than your family, and that makes it a little more complicated. And then you layer over that this incredible visceral experience that everybody is seeing in a way that we've never accessed war in quite the same way for most of us in this country, unless you come from a war-torn country. And so I think it complicates that process so much more. And the idea that, Janice was just speaking about, the idea of ambiguous loss and grief, is, oh, somebody's back there, needs to go on mute.
I feel like having a jolly.
Okay, I gotta listen to this until.
Carrie, you need to unmute now.
That is like control. Thank you, Audra. Okay, so now I'm back. But so the idea of grief. And I think for a lot of our youth, our kids, and even those of us who are adults, and I include myself in that, we carry the grief of a loss that doesn't really get recognized. There aren't rituals for the kind of loss where you don't necessarily know where you come from. You don't necessarily have access to your culture that you come from. Maybe you don't know about your birth family and what happened to them, who they are. Do they think about you? Do they care about you? All of those things get compartmentalized and stashed away. And I think honestly, if we're being honest, that we spend a lifetime figuring out how to process those emotions and integrate them into our experience. And so when you're an adolescent or a young adult, you're kind of doing all of that in real time. And then you have this event that happens that is fraught with loss and grief. And while as a parent, we can be really frightened by what that means for our children, because there's so much pain in that. And if any, as a parent, I want to protect my kids from that for anything in the world. And I also know that there are real limits about how much I can protect them from. And so I think it's important to really consider and reframe this whole experience that we're having collectively as parents of adopted kids and as adopted youth and people, to look at it as an opportunity to really lean into the grief for what it is, right? There's nothing more profound than having your loss actually reflected back to you in this really profound, violent, painful way. So this all gets so much more complicated. So these are intersections of life experiences. And then we're talking about also these different layers of, are you from Russia? Are you from Ukraine? How much of that is a shared understanding of culture and history? My son has shared with me, he's from Eastern Ukraine. And as a young guy, he always kind of felt very connected to Russian culture. As a family growing up, when we celebrated Ukrainian Christmas, much of our music and our food and our Christmas tree ornaments were also from Russia. And so there's this intersection of those cultures. And then there's also the conflict that is undeniable across history. And so kids are learning about that in a different way now too, with others saying, oh, well, you're from Russia, why are you destroying my country? So these are the real things that kids are feeling. And this is sort of a natural segue into their access to social media. So I'm pretty sure if we go to the next slide, we're still, nope, we're gonna, okay. So in my head, because the next thing I speak about is social media, I have a segue. So we'll come back to that in a second. But to kind of set Janice up for this part of the conversation, we're talking about how kids show up with their experiences, their pain, and their need to understand all of this conflict within themselves that's also being mirrored back to them from the world right now. And what kinds of behaviors might we see, and what do we need to understand about those behaviors so we can be more supportive and be that emotional container that our kids need. So
yeah. Thank you, Carrie. I'm going to address this slide in a moment. That's okay. I just wanted to go back to something you said. You were talking about the different layers of culture. And I think that's absolutely right. And also, your children are part of your culture, your family's culture, your immediate family's culture, your extended family's culture. And perhaps that's layered as well. Maybe there are more than one culture that your children come from in your family. So I think that's really important. And that's why kids are torn and feeling so in between when there are all of these really salient parts of their life and that they can't always sort out. So understand, yes, go ahead, Karen.
Before we actually get behind the behavior, I wanted to just talk a little bit about parents and how it is, like how parents are feeling as they're trying to help their children make sense of this when it's so confusing to us. It's so important, as a primary attachment figure, it's so important to provide safety and security for a child, and becoming aware of our own feelings about this, and making sure that we're doing enough to keep ourselves whole is incredibly important. And so, just being curious, with your kids, just being curious with yourself about why you might be feeling the way you're feeling is really important, and finding a way to settle so you can fully show up to hear, see, and understand your child. So anyway, sorry, Erica.
That's okay. Well, and it's a perfect segue, because sometimes it's really hard to know what you're seeing and what you're hearing. Wouldn't it be great if our kids could just say to us, oh, this is what I'm going through. This is how I'm feeling. This is why I cut school. This is why I yelled at you. This is why I'm disrespectful. All of those things that are hard and challenging. We don't always know what's behind that behavior, because what we see is the behavior. The hardest part of parenting, one of the hardest parts, is really reflecting on what that's about. Not taking it personally is one of the things that's really important, because what's behind the behaviors has so much to do with what's going on in your child's head, what's going on in their body, what's going on in their emotional life. And sometimes it's really hard to communicate that with words. So behavior becomes the way of communicating that. And that doesn't make your job any easier. So what Janice and Carrie were talking about is approaching this with so much curiosity. And in order to do that, it's really being able to settle yourself, to know that their communication is a process, and they are dealing with so many of the feelings that we talked about: the grief, the loss, perhaps being bullied, perhaps being othered, maybe not feeling that they belong, trying to figure out their culture. So when you see behavior, it's really looking underneath it. And part of it is going to have to do with your child's beginnings in life. What kind of trauma did they have? What kind of attachment experience are you working through? Or maybe you have already. Those are really important things to think about. So the other thing that's so important to address is that kids, no matter what age, want their parents to keep them safe. And, you know, even though they know on some level that you can't always do that, it's really a wish to be kept safe. And at the same time, those of you with teenagers and young adults also know that your kids are pushing against you. They're pushing away from you. They're trying to separate and become individuals. And how they navigate that is sometimes really tricky for them when they don't feel safe, especially. How can they be out in the world when they don't feel safe inside? So much of a parent's job is really figuring out, how can I help my child feel emotionally safe, feel safe inside, why they may be angry and resentful and disobeying me and all of those things.
You know, I think one of the things that's really interesting about looking what's behind the behavior is the recognition sometimes that when people feel really badly inside, they might project it onto their safest person, which is their parent. I want you to feel as bad as I'm feeling because I am in so much pain. And, you know, some of the behaviors that we see are, you know, hard. They're really hard to deal with. My request is that you be curious. You know, when you're getting some behaviors that are really extreme, whether it's extreme sleeping all the time, whether it's extreme not sleeping, whether it's verbally rude, aggressive, acting in a manner that's different, that you be curious. You know, we always recommend curiosity as the prime way to figure out what's going on, because when we're curious, we're in our thinking part of our brain and our prefrontal cortex. We're not reacting, we're not being emotional when we're curious. So anytime you find you're having a big feeling in response to your child, if you can just go, I remember Janice was talking about being curious. I'm feeling really disrespected right now, really angry, really all kinds of things. But you know, Erica will talk in a little bit about how we regulate our bodies, but really stepping back and think curiosity, because there's something going on that's leading to him acting that way. There's something going on that's leading to her acting that way. And the way that we settle and manage these big feelings is in the context of relationship. It's when we feel seen, we feel heard, and we feel felt. And as parents and as adults who care for our kids, the only way we're going to get there is if we can figure out what might be going on. And sometimes it's just sitting quietly with somebody. They don't need to tell you the whole story until they're ready. If you have a child that comes home from school and goes straight to their room and shuts the door and totally shuts you out, you know, be curious. Maybe come to the door and wonder, you know, with them, in small amounts. You want to modulate the amount, because if somebody is already feeling overwhelmed and you're like, okay, sweetheart, what's going on? Tell me what's going on. I see you're upset, reflecting that behavior back. That's not going to get you where you want. You want to go slowly and gently towards understanding what might be behind that behavior.
So many of you had questions about, how do I talk to my child? How do I talk to my teen about the war? And part of that is being available to listen, following their lead. Some kids will say, I'm not thinking about it at all. That's okay. You can perhaps offer some guidance about, maybe tell them what you're thinking about the war. And some kids will be very verbal and very anxious. Whatever it is, it's being a container, helping to hold whatever they are experiencing and not really trying to make it better for them necessarily. That one of the hardest things about being a parent is that you want your kids' pain to go away. I have adult children and I never want them to be in pain. I always want to fix it. I always want to problem solve. And we really can't do that most of the time for our kids. And just being able to sit with them if they want to talk or they don't want to talk, as that safe space, as that really important attachment figure, as Janice was talking about, being in relationship is really what needs to happen. And you're the people they feel the safest with. You're the people they feel the safest with.
I think I love all of that, and I think it's when we think about behavior as communication in and of itself, one of the things that I like to do is think about it sort of as I have this diagram thing in my head, which is, okay, I'm seeing a behavior, and that process of curiosity is sort of like being a detective,
Mm-hmm.
that you're like, okay, so I'm seeing this behavior, but actually the behavior is really the end result, right? And all of us want to impact the behavior, but really what the behavior is the thing that's telling us about an emotional need. And so if we can figure out what the need is and then what emotion the child is having because of that need, and we can respond to the need, then we can support the emotion and the behavior. And the behavior will end up changing as a result of that. And so it's a big ask, right? Because we don't always know. And as we've already said, kids don't always know. It's very hard to find words for what they're experiencing around these particular issues, because they're so complex and there really aren't adequate words always. And so presence and really doing things that help the connection, whatever that looks like. It might be sitting side by side playing a video game. It might be sitting side by side and watching comedy, which, it could be anything. But we'll talk more about all of those kinds of strategies in a minute. But
I like that, Carrie. Also, you're talking about it almost like it's an opportunity, because I think it is. It's an opportunity. That behavior is an opportunity for parents to get to know their kids in a different way. Mm-hmm. And that also takes away some of our judgment, maybe some of our anxiety as well as parents.
And then rather than reacting to it, which all of us do, because when it hits our limbic system and we're like, what? You can't talk to me that way. Remember, curiosity.
As Pooh Bear says, think, 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 think.
Okay, I think we're ready for the next slide.
Okay, so we've talked about, it's almost like behind the veil, right? Like what is it that we as parents get to know and understand about our kids is often, especially during adolescence and early adulthood, we don't get to see behind the screen, literally the screen, right? The screen. And I think that it's important, while we definitely saw the questions from parents about how much is too much exposure and how do we manage that. I want to offer another lens for understanding how social media, how youth are looking and using social media as a way of understanding, as a way of processing, as a way of coping. And that it's not kind of this all or nothing way that we often think of when it comes to social media, that it's all bad or really dangerous. And I sort of have a context for that. So for understanding that. So I've been asking questions of both of my kids, right? And so it's a small sample, but I do believe that they're pretty representative of how people their age are using the internet right now, or using social media. So in the case of Instagram, it was my son who said, it really, or sorry, no, my daughter, I forgot which quote was up. But so she has made relationships, made friends, over the internet, through social media, through Instagram, connected with kids her own age, and formed real relationships. That we are in a world now where, virtual reality is reality, not the only reality, but it is a reality that a lot of our kids are living in. And so now there's this immediacy of shared experience. And there's something really wonderful and beautiful about that when you think of reconnecting with culture and who you are and where you come from. And so, this has really been a hopeful kind of connection, because it means that maybe someday she'll be able to find her birth family that, through having connections in the country. So there's that. And so then when we think about, okay, how do we set limits on this? And we get this huge reaction. I mean, we can get that reaction from any kid who is or isn't adopted. But when you have this other layer, it's sort of like, okay, what are you denying, and what do you really need to hear from your child about, and what do you need to understand differently, so that when you think about limits, how can you do this in a way that doesn't feel so threatening and invalidating to what they need? So, and then the other, is the other quote, came from my son, and he was talking about just social media in general, and the importance of being able to feel like he could experience what people who are living through this time in Ukraine feels like, from the people that are living it, as opposed to this filter that the news provides. Understanding that not everything you see is true, but a lot of it is, and you can find reliable news sources, and some of it we wouldn't want to have exposure to, but there's a need there to better understand and feel connected, and to have a safe space where you can anonymously, express your question, express your feelings, and process all of that in an internalized way, as opposed to in a way that feels more exposed. And so, so one of the things, that we mentioned is, that our colleague from Ukraine, who's a child psychologist, she kind of weighed in on this question, and she, made the very important point that a lot of what's out there on the internet, and social media, really is reflecting the worst and the most desperate and the most tragic and the most painful. And we know, as our brains, as human beings, our brains are constantly rewiring and adapting. But when we live, we know that chronic exposure to violent images changes the way our brains wire. And so we can get stuck, as our kids are, who have developing brains real time, like they are still in the process of development. They are getting wired in a way for hypervigilance and survival state and fight, flight, or freeze. And so that is why it's super important to have the conversation about how social media is being used, And I think that, it goes back to conversation and communicating rather than just laying down the law like this all or nothing kind of thing. This is really an opportunity for collaborative problem solving. And so, we want to empathize. We want to, clarify what they need, what their concern is, and then share what our adult concern is about this, explain a little bit about the brain, and then collaborate and brainstorm and, assess and look at different solutions that kind of work for everybody, and that's informed by both people's experience and understanding, the parent and the child. So I'm going to keep going. So on the next slide.
Carrie, can I just interrupt for 1 second and ask you something concrete? Is Instagram and what other social media sites?
I mean, Twitter.
Twitter, Instagram,
Snapchat.
Yeah,
Snapchat.
Snapchat, TikTok.
Okay.
Yeah, they call it the TikTok war. Facebook, that's us. That's our generation, and kids don't rely on that very much. But so I want to share this poem here, and this is really hard. And I want to just take a minute to talk about this. And I feel really appreciative of my daughter sharing this, because, honestly, she didn't talk about her feelings about any of this for several weeks. It felt like weeks, maybe it was days, but for me, it felt like a month, right? Where I really wanted to know what was happening. And so she has a friend, her name is Diana, and she's from a part of Kiev, on the outskirts of Kiev, and they connected through art. So this is a picture of Diana that she sent to Kristen, and Kristen is also an artist. So they connected around art, and then so much more. They're the similar age. And Diana lost both of her parents when she was quite young. And so she has been raised by relatives, but everybody has left, but she really wanted to stay. And she decided to join the civilian army. And so I don't know how many days it's been now, but Kristen has not heard from her. And but she received this poem from her before they lost contact. So I'm going to take a minute to read through this and share and my purpose, my intention in sharing this is to really illustrate this is the kind of raw exposure that our kids are having. This is how they're experiencing what's going on.
Yeah.
Okay. So
just before you start, I just want to let people know that it's a difficult poem. So if it feels overwhelming to you, just be prepared for it's a trauma warning. Yeah.
Yes, thank you for saying that. And also, I feel like there's one more caveat, just so that we're being really careful too, is that, again, I just want to emphasize the intention is to share with you what our kids are being exposed to and how they receive it. This is not intended to express any kind of political view. Okay, so this is from Diana. We will not give up. Needles of roses under the skin with pain. The flowers have withered. My land is covered by blood. I don't know how to keep her warm. Around the explosions and hails, all around is frightening silence. Shoots again, it shoots again, and time again, I don't flinch. My dear relatives, everyone fled. Who? Where? I'm not going nowhere. This is my only home in the world. Hiding from them between the walls, I pray, I wish death quietly to all those who even mentally believe that we will give at least half a meter, at least half a glance. All roads are erased for you a long time ago. And to be honest, when someone doesn't get in touch, when I see smoke, when the window trembles, I am with all my boundless strength. I'm waiting for that moment when I pull the trigger, that at least one orc died at my hands. You bastards, you've probably forgotten where you went. Then I will remind you. You came to our house from hell for some reason, and we bring you back there. We will not give a millimeter. We will not give now under our very blue sky. Glory to Ukraine.
Very powerful.
So I think,
So
there we go.
So it's so painful. It's so painful. And, when we think about how do we hold our own feelings and so we can hold our children's feelings, I can't stress enough that how you take care of yourself matters. And recognizing the stress and the pain that you're in as you navigate this, hearing that poem, imagining it, it just, I don't know about you, but it hurts. On the airplane, they always say, put your oxygen mask on first. It's the same thing with parenting. We have to put our oxygen mask on first, because for our children who are having the kinds of very raw, tear the soul kind of feelings, the way that they're going to get through it is if they're seen, they're heard, and they're understood. There's so much science that tells us that the best way we can deal with trauma, that we can heal from trauma, is when we do it in the context of relationship. So being there for your child, having someone be there for you so you can manage this together is critical. It's critical for managing the many different feelings that you may be experiencing and your child's experiencing. And the whole feeling of helplessness that we feel as we watch this, it makes me want to jump out of my skin. It makes me want to jump out of my skin. And so I have to find a way to manage that feeling if I'm going to be able to be there for my child, to help her deal with the shame, the rage, the anger. She feels that her country could be inflicting this much pain on other human beings. And so it just, when you're having those feelings, not ranting and raving about how mad you are at the Russian people, it's not helpful. It's hurtful. It's hurtful. Making sure you separate what the government's doing from how the people feel is incredibly important. And just even thinking about how do we minimize the opportunities for our children to be hurt, for our children to get exposure. If you're at a family event, at a social activity, and you hear people saying difficult things about the war and about the Russian people, don't just sit idly. You need to speak up. You need to model for your child that it's not the Russian people. This is a government-led thing, and so we don't want to other. It's very easy. We do that all the time in our society. We other groups, and it's so hurtful. It's so hurtful. Yeah. Was there anything, Erica or Carrie?
Yeah. I was going to talk also about for some of you, it may be one of the first times you've had to advocate for your child in this way. And somebody has to be on mute. There we go. Thank you. And it could engender feelings of incompetence. And I know for me, one of the hardest parts of being a mother was when I felt incompetent, when I felt like I, a professional, should know what to do with my kids. But sometimes we don't. Sometimes we feel incompetent at being a parent and knowing the quote unquote right thing to do. So I also encourage you to be able to talk to each other, to talk to other parents, to be able to share that, yeah, sometimes I feel really lousy as a mom or a dad. Sometimes I don't know what I'm doing, because that is really helpful when we can name our feelings. The expression is we name them to tame them. So when we can name our feelings, we're going to be able to, I think, manage those better. And then we're also modeling that for our kids, that we can talk, not to download them on our kids. I'm not saying that, but to really manage them. And then when you feel like you've processed your feelings, maybe talk to your kids about how helpless you feel sometimes, how exposed you feel as a family right now because you've adopted from that part of the world. So managing feelings is really complex, and we have to check in with ourselves regularly, take our own kind of temperature as we go along. I don't know if you had anything else to add, Carrie, but I was going to think about the next slide otherwise.
Yeah, no, I think I think about all these words and how I experience them as a parent. And I think that incompetence piece is huge. And I think the other one is that we're the easiest, when children feel safe with us, we tend to be on the receiving end of the anger and the rage. And, that rejection that comes at us, and how we have to really take stock of our own sense of self, and again being curious about the behavior when it doesn't make sense and it's not justified. There's not a really owning it when it is, but also really being able to learn how to have that distance from the behaviors so that we don't feel that chronic sense of rejection and incompetence. So it's a lot, while we're also having all our other feelings right along with our kids. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I just want to say we've also just come from managing a pandemic, and none of us, no matter what level of loss we've experienced, none of us is the same as we were 2 years ago, and our children certainly aren't. So that is also the context in which all of this is going on.
Right. I'm so glad you said that. Right.
Yeah. So Janice and Carrie talked about the limbic system. So when we get upset, it's really interesting what happens to our brains. We go into that part of the brain that thinks we have to survive. And we start into the fighting or flighting or fighting, fleeing, or freezing modes. Can never say that. And sometimes it's really hard to get out of that. And when we're in that kind of limbic system reactive place, it's really important to first of all, to know that that's where we are, and to have some strategies for resettling our nervous system and come back to kind of a place of homeostasis. So we want to talk about some different ways of doing that. One of the important ways that I manage those kind of feelings is I really work on helping myself to feel grounded on the earth, to immediately remember, oh yeah, there's the earth under me, feeling my feet on the floor. If I'm sitting on a chair, feeling my butt on the chair, really feeling the ground under me. And there's actually another strategy for grounding. This is research-based, putting your right arm under your left underarm, and then putting your left arm on top of your right arm. There's research that that's another very effective grounding technique. And then mindfulness. So mindfulness is such a big buzzword right now. And what I'm really going to address tonight is how can you stay present focused? Because when you're working hard and raising a family and dealing with war and kids who might be behaving in ways that you don't understand, it's really easy to it's really natural that our minds just kind of go on automatic pilot and start churning out all these thoughts maybe about what happened yesterday that you should have done differently, and oh my God, what's going to happen tomorrow? And if you can know that that's happening, and then just come back to what's happening right now in the present moment. Breathing is often a very effective strategy to get ourselves back to that present moment, where really in this present moment, everything is okay. There's no catastrophe looming and nothing bad happened. Just in this moment, everything is okay. So the breath that's often really helpful is to breathe in, and you might want to try this as I'm talking, breathing in at the count of 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Holding it, count of 2, 1, 2. And then exhaling, a long exhale, even to the count of 6. Because what research shows us is that the exhalation actually quiets down our parasympathetic nervous system. So we have more of an opportunity to reset, to kind of digest and reset. So breathing when you find yourself getting activated is really helpful. And in our counseling center, we teach this thing called stop, drop, and roll, which is a very similar kind of thing. Stopping whatever is going on with you, however you're being activated, maybe moving back, from your kid, going into the next room, grounding yourself, so dropping inside. So you're stopping, you're dropping inside, breathing, feeling your grounding self, and then rolling out with a new strategy that's responsive and not reactive. So you don't have to do that for any particular amount of time every day. On the run, whenever you can, with your eyes wide open, you can breathe. Breathing is simple and it's free. And you don't really have to schedule it. It just happens, right? And then
I should schedule it though.
Schedule it. You could schedule it. And then it's really talking to your kids about that. It's not when they're activated saying, calm down. That doesn't work. Has anyone ever told you to calm down when you were activated? Not a good idea. But you can also model that for your kids. And then for some of us, it's also listening to music that brings us to a quiet, settled place inside. It's also being out in nature, walking and looking at trees and flowers and feeling the air on us. And sharing some of these activities with your kids, just connecting with them, just being in relationship with them for 10 minutes, maybe twice a day, just being present, not doing something else, not on your phone, but just being present with them can be so important to also help them resettle their nervous system. And then Carrie is going to teach us about a great technique, strategy called tapping. Unless you guys want to add anything else. Are we ready for tapping?
Ready for tapping?
Okay, ready for tapping.
Okay, so often when I do this in a training, we spend a whole lot of time on it. And I'm very aware of our time tonight and our desire to allow time for questions and also to make sure that we have time to hear our message from our Ukrainian colleague. So, so this is a little bit of an abbreviation, but you're going to be receiving more information about tapping with the other resources that we send out following our town hall. And but I want to give you the basic techniques and a flavor of what this looks like and why it works. So just to give you a little bit of history, tapping is a fusion of psychology and Chinese medicine. So the understanding is ancient Chinese medicine, acupuncture, acupressure has a philosophy that that we have energy points that go through our body, and that when energy becomes stagnated because of a traumatic event, a trauma memory, something stressful in our lives, the energy gets stuck, and that contributes to our disease, illness, or dis-ease, our dysregulated emotional state. And sometimes we get stuck there. And so, Erica and Janice, I think we've all at some point referenced the survival brain, the amygdala, the brain that gets on to fight, flight, or freeze because of, and this is the key word here in terms of being curious, is perceived threat. Okay, so this is not necessarily what we see as a threat, like a guy standing on the corner that's going to do something. Sorry about the guy, it could be a woman, just to be fair. Okay, but this is a perceived threat. And that perception of threat, and I think this is true for adults as well as kids, but if our children are adopted, there are blind spots. We don't always know all the experiences that happened to them before they came to us. And so a lot of those things that happened what I call below the waterline, pre-verbally. They get stored in the body. And so there could be some kind of trauma memory or trigger that happens for our kids that we're completely unaware of. We don't know where it comes from. They may even be unaware of it. But what we know and what we see through behavior is that their brains are on fire and they're in that fight, flight, or freeze mode. Okay, so what we know about tapping, there's a ton of research that's been done on it, and it's been used really effectively with war veterans to treat PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And what they know is that through the use of tapping, literally tapping, and we'll go through this, the different spots on the body, the meridian points on the body, these energy points, actually reduces, I was going to say cholesterol, that would be cool too, cortisol, stress hormone that pulses through our body when we're in that fight, flight, or freeze state, survival brain, lots of cortisol, which, contributes to our brains not working right. Okay, so let's start. Okay, so there's 9 points that we need to know about. So we're going to review those, and you have the visual in front of you, and then you have me in front of you too. Okay, so the first one is called the karate chop. Okay, and this is the just below your pinky on that side of your palm. Okay, and this is the first point. And so you tap here. And as far as how hard, all of that, you can do 2 fingers, you can do your whole hand. You can do left hand, right hand, it doesn't matter. There's no wrong way. And the pressure is generally like if you're strumming your fingers on the table. Okay, so that's the first one, karate chop. Then the next one is right inside your eyebrow. And having glasses, you can move your glasses if it helps you. So that's the other one. I tend to use 2 fingers. The other is side of the eye, just above your temple. Okay. The next one is below the eye. Again, glasses sometimes make that a little awkward. Okay. And then beneath the nose. Okay. And then the chin. And then the next one is here just below the collarbone. And I tend to like to make this bilateral. I do it on both sides. And if you alternate, that just has the other benefit of calming your brain. We don't know why that is, but it does. The other is below your armpit, or right on your bra line if you're a woman. And then the final one is the top of your head. Okay, so those are the techniques. Now, that in and of itself can be very calming to your brain. And I was about to change the slide. So we're ready for the next slide. So what I'm going to do is kind of broadly describe how this is structured so that you can develop this for yourself. And I do want to say, if you go, and you'll get this information later, to the tapping solution, you can download the app on your phone. It's, I don't know, $40 for the year. And I'm telling you, it will be the best money you spend all year. like free therapy. Access it anytime you need it, when you need it, 10 minutes. You're not going to feel the same way that you did when you started. It's that effective. Okay, so here we go. So the first step is that you identify a problem that you want to focus on, and it can be, for the purpose of today, maybe we just say general anxiety, or it can be a specific situation, an issue that's causing you to feel anxious. And I want you right now, as we go through this, we're going to just try a little mini of this out. Consider the problem or the situation. I'm feeling anxious about the war in Ukraine. So how do you feel about it right now? And think about the intensity on a scale of 0 to 10, with 0 being the lowest level of anxiety and 10 being the highest. Okay, so hold that number in your head. And then what you do is you're going to set up what we call a setup statement. Okay, so your setup statement should acknowledge the problem you want to deal with, and then you're going to follow it with an unconditional affirmation of yourself as a person. Okay, now this may seem like, why am I, giving more energy to that which is causing the anxiety? But part of that is because your brain's already doing it. Your body's already experiencing it. So you're validating what that internal experience is, instead of trying to bypass it with, I feel less anxious, right? It just doesn't really work. Okay. So an example, I'm going to throw out a couple of examples. So even though I feel this anxiety, I deeply and completely accept myself. Or even though I'm anxious about what my child is experiencing about the war, I deeply and completely accept myself. Or maybe it's, even though I feel doubt as a parent trying to protect my child, I deeply and completely accept myself. And honestly, you can even do this when you're feeling that sense of panic. Even though I panic when I think about the war, I deeply and completely accept myself. So let's get ready to tap. Okay, so with your four fingers on one hand, begin tapping the karate chop point on the other hand. And we're going to repeat our setup statement 3 times. So I'm going to use anxiety. So even though I am feeling anxiety, I deeply and completely accept myself. I am feeling so much anxiety, and even though I do, I completely and deeply accept myself. So much anxiety, and I still deeply and completely accept myself. Okay, now we take a deep breath, inviting the calm, which our body is built to do when we exhale, which is one of those beautiful designs. Okay, so now on each site, we're going to tap 5 to 7 times on the remaining points in the sequence that we just kind of went through. And it's helpful to have a reminder phrase, right? So such as my fear, my doubt, my anxiety, to help you mentally focus on the issue and the emotion. So what you're doing is sending a signal to your brain by tapping and holding that emotion in your mind. You're sending a signal to your brain that you're safe and that you're okay in this moment, also while you're feeling the feeling. Okay, so that's what's really important. Okay, so let's go through. So we started here, we're now going here. So all my anxiety, so much anxiety. I'm feeling panic. I really know that these feelings are hard, that anxiety that doesn't stop. Just keeps showing up no matter how hard I try. Just that anxiety just is so present when I think about the war. I really want that anxiety to stop, even though I feel it all the time. And the anxiety just continues. It's still with me. And sometimes it shows up as panic. or doubt or fear. Okay, let's take another breath. Okay, so you've completed that sequence, and I want everybody to focus on that initial statement that they maybe had internally, they made, or we talked about the anxiety that we feel. Okay, and so if you were going to give it a rating from 0 to 10 again, I'd be curious to know, and you can put it in the chat if you'd like, but just take note of it yourself if you've noticed any kind of shift from where you were to where you feel now. Okay, and so if your anxiety or whatever that negative feeling is that you're trying to release, if it's higher than a 2 or a 3, then you want to just keep doing some tapping on it. And you can keep on tapping until you really feel that reduction. But then what you're going to do is you're going to maybe change your setup statement a little bit. You know, maybe you're going to say something, you know, my kids are doing the best they can. I'm doing the best that I can. And I still feel the anxiety. So you're now combining the efforts that you're doing to change the feeling with acknowledging the feeling and leaning into it as you tap through the sequence. Okay. And so now what you want to do to kind of close out the tapping experience is that you want to start instilling some positive feelings in its place. And so this is different than just positive thinking, right? So you're not being dishonest with yourself. You're not trying to obscure the stress and anxiety inside yourself with some kind of insincere affirmation, right? That stuff just doesn't work. In fact, it often makes us feel like failures, right? Because I'm not really believing what I'm saying to myself. So rather you're confronting and dealing with the anxiety and its corresponding negative emotions, and you're offering deep and complete acceptance to both your feelings and yourself. So then what we want to do is it makes it much more effective if we do positive thinking techniques at the same time that we're tapping. And so what that might look like is I have faith in my ability to support my child, or I'm becoming better able to cope with stress of the war, or I have faith in my ability to handle my child's grief and loss. And so you can continue to use these positive phrases with the same sequence of tapping points until you really feel that shift and kind of ground that. So that's tapping.
That's great. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Carrie.
Thank you.
So Erica and Carrie, we need to have a little powwow and decide, since it is now 8:19. I know we want to have questions. I don't presently see any in the chat, but we did have 2 more things to do. One is to respond to your questions. Secondly, we have a communication from our colleague and friend in Ukraine, which is a lovely message that she sent. And we also have a poll I want to talk about what you want to do next and how we can best support you. So
I'm feeling like it's a priority to find out how to best support people from this point on, and hear folks' questions, or have them be in, if there are anyone wants to put any in the chat box, we can certainly spend some time answering them.
Okay. Yeah, I don't see any questions in the chat right now.
Okay.
So I'm wondering if we should move on to the next to a poll.
That sounds great.
Okay. What we
Can I just say something? I'm so sorry for interrupting, but do you think that we could do maybe we close with the message?
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a great idea. Perfect.
That's a great idea.
All together.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So we put up a poll, and if any of these next steps would be relevant to you, this is an opportunity, if you'd like, a support group for parents for managing and understanding during this time, a support group for youth and adoptees, a town hall for youth and adoptees, setting up Facebook group, or other. So feel free to fill this out, give us your feedback, and from that, we'll be getting back to the entire group. There was about 68 people who registered for this session. And this will be on the website. We'll be sharing it with more people, but then also taking this and directly designing services for you in response to this, should people want more support. And everything would be virtual.
Mm-hmm. And you might think of some other ideas once you leave this town hall tonight. So certainly just get in touch with us if that's the case.
So would it be okay, Audra, if we moved on to the next slide of what to do? Or does it impact the, here we go. And well, okay, so we're going to come back. We're going to end with this.
Our compatriots.
We'll end with that. Okay, and so then we'll go one more slide, please. And one more. Okay, so we put together resources for you, and we put one of these nice little QR codes in this bit.ly of AT Ukraine. It's going to link you to our website where we have resources in a whole lot of domains. And we're going to be building this out each day as we learn of additional resources. And so this is a place you can check back to see, and if there's ideas that you want to share, we absolutely welcome it. You know, taking action, there's all kinds of research that shows that when we're in a situation that we don't have control and we feel out of control or we have a loss, if we can take action in some way in our lives, we actually fare a whole lot better. So whether it's donating to a charity that's actively working on the ground in Ukraine, whether it is, you know, doing something, some kind of humanitarian effort, it will be good for you and for your child to actively do that together and participate in it. Taking action is really powerful and impacting the lives of others. You know, we talk about see something, say something, do something. This is a great opportunity to do something. Next slide, please. This is a conference that we have coming up, all about attachment. This is going to be a program that's going to help with connection, with understanding the mind-body connection, because sometimes there's not really words that are effective for dealing with, for human connection, and we have to slow our systems down enough so we're able to do that. So this is going to really be the focus of understanding. So if you were interested in kind of getting behind the behaviors and to human connection, that's what this conference is going to be. And then the next slide, please. And we also put Carrie's counseling practice, our Adoptions Together's counseling practice. We have in-person telehealth in both practices, and you know, just figuring out, how do I know if we're at the point that we need counseling? You want to be curious. You want to see if you have any questions, please pick up the phone and call and see if there's some extra support that can be helpful. We're not talking about a lifelong commitment to psychotherapy. We're talking about managing a particularly difficult chapter in your child's life, in your life, where the pressure is just so immense and so intense. You have support, you have resources, you have a team that wraps around you. You know, at Adoptions Together, we say every child, every family, every step of the way. This is part of our step of the way, to every step of the way, to be there for the community, to offer those really important support services. No one's in this alone. And if you feel alone, reach out. We're here. Carrie's here. We care. And that's why we put this together for you. So I think we'll end with our words from Ukraine. Maybe, Audra, if we could go back to that slide. And I want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. And this will be living on our website if you want to come back and visit it again or share it with anybody else.
And I think also that Audra's going to put the words in the chat for you to kind of follow along, because some words
it's translated. Yeah. Her daughter translated it.
Dear our compatriots,
Let me put the words in the chat real quick, because if I click the button, it will stop playing the music.
Oh, right. We'll also have this out as a document so that you can go back and listen to it. And we also will put out the Ukrainian version too for anybody who speaks.
Find where it cut off, but I'm going to play it and I'll add the rest when it's finished.
those who live now in America, Ukrainian children and adults, we want to address you with these words. Today is a very difficult time for all Ukrainians and for many people in the world. You know about it. Through our colleagues, we have received a large number of questions from you, and we understand that many of you are now experiencing anxiety, maybe even fear or bewilderment. Many of you are asking yourself how to understand and realize what is happening in the world. What will happen next? What can I do? How can I find out what is happening in my native land? We would like to send you such a message. We here in Ukraine are very glad that far away, many kilometers away across the ocean, in another country, people close to us live. We are very glad that you think about your motherland and worry about it. We want to say that we think of you too. We really want you to know that long distance doesn't create barriers for us to communicate, send warm wishes, and kind words to each other. We can ask each other questions. We are ready to talk on different topics. We can exchange opinions and impressions. We want you to know and always remember that we really need you. You are very valuable and significant to us. Remember that here are your roots, your history, traditions, and customs. We are ready to tell you about it. Thanks to our colleagues for giving us the opportunity to communicate. And the most important thing for us is to know that you can be happy, that you live in joy and warmth. Live in your families, communicate with your loved ones, listen and understand each other. Be considerate and kind-hearted to each other. Protect each other from bad emotions, bad moods, and bad news. Before you say or do something, ask yourself how my loved one will feel after I say or do something. The most important thing in the life of any person is the smile or joy of a loved one. Just as the main thing for us is your smile and joy. We will always think of you here, and sincerely hope that very soon we will have the opportunity to see each other. You will come to Ukraine, to the place where you were born, where you have your roots and your culture. We will tell and show you these wonderful places, beautiful nature, home. Let's be together and be happy.
Yeah. So, in the face, she's in Odessa, and in the face of the air raid sirens, which impacted her taping this a few times, she's still finding joy. She's still finding hope. And I think that it's just so important to communicate that to our children and to hold on to it. If we just sit in front of the TV screen, it's really easy to not hear something from somebody on the ground. So I hope you take that. I hope you take our words tonight and that it was helpful. And we thank you so much. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Erica. And thank you, everybody who joined in and invested this time with us this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good
everybody.
night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you for your comments in the chat box, folks. We appreciate that.
All right.